Martell Holt and Shari right now isn't just another update in their long and complicated history. It feels like a real turning point. And honestly, many people didn't expect it to unfold like this. For years, people watched their relationship go through everything: love, success, betrayal, arguments, and finally a very public breakup. But even after all that, there was still a feeling that Martell believed he would always have some kind of place in Melody's life. Not as her husband, but at least as someone who still mattered to her. But things changed when rumors about Melody and Harper started turning into something that looked more real than speculation. That's when everything shifted. This time, it didn't look like drama or revenge. It looked like peace. And for Martell, that peace didn't include him anymore. To understand this moment, you have to go back to where it all began. Melody and Martell weren't just a couple, they were seen as a strong team. A success story. They built businesses together, raised a family, and presented a picture of perfection to the world. But behind closed doors, things were very different. What people didn't see was the emotional pressure Melody was carrying for years: the stress, the disappointment, and the feeling that something wasn't right in her marriage. Eventually, the truth came out about Martell's repeated cheating. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It happened more than once, and it deeply damaged their relationship. That's when everything broke apart. Melody made the difficult decision to walk away. She chose herself, her healing, and her children. She focused on therapy, self-growth, and rebuilding her life step by step. Meanwhile, Martell stayed in the chaos he helped create. There were public issues, rumors, and different relationships that didn't last. He tried to explain himself at times, but the damage to his image and relationship was already done. Over time, they improved slightly when it came to co-parenting. Things became calmer, at least on the surface. But there was still an unspoken tension between them. And deep down, Martell never seemed fully comfortable with the idea of Melody moving on completely. Then Harper entered the picture. At first, it didn't seem important. Just two people interacting in public. But slowly, people began noticing their connection, the way they talked, laughed, and carried themselves around each other. It felt natural and peaceful. More importantly, Melody looked different. Happier. Lighter. More at ease. The rumors grew, but Melody didn't rush to respond or deny anything. She stayed quiet. And that silence said a lot on its own. From Martell's side, watching all of this wasn't easy. It wasn't just jealousy. It was realization. The realization that Melody had moved forward, not just away from him, but beyond the version of life they once shared. Reports suggested he became more distant. Less active publicly. More withdrawn than usual. And for someone used to being seen and heard, that silence stood out. Eventually, emotions caught up with him. Behind closed doors, he reportedly broke down emotionally. Not for attention, not for drama, but from regret. The kind of regret that comes when you finally understand what you lost and realize you can't fix it anymore. Because by then, it wasn't about competition or comparisons. It was about consequences. Years of choices that couldn't be undone. Meanwhile, Melody continued moving forward in peace. She stayed focused on her children, her career, and her growth. If she was happy in her personal life, she kept it private and protected. And that peace was something Martell had no control over. For Melody, this chapter represents growth. She's no longer the woman trying to hold everything together at her own expense. Now she chooses what she allows into her life, and what she doesn't. Peace has become her priority. For her children, that stability matters. They see a stronger, calmer version of their mother, someone no longer stuck in emotional conflict. For Martell, however, this moment forces reflection. It's not just about losing Melody, it's about understanding how his own actions led to this outcome. And that's not something easy to face. Because when everything else fades, excuses, distractions, noise, you're left with reality. And sometimes that reality is regret. Now, the situation has shifted completely. Not because of revenge or conflict, but because one person chose peace and kept moving forward. Melody isn't looking back anymore. Martell is left thinking about what went wrong. And the question now is simple: what happens next? Does he learn from it or repeat the same patterns again? As for Melody, she seems focused on building a new chapter, one that finally feels stable, peaceful, and truly her own. And one thing is clear, this story isn't over yet. But the balance of power has definitely changed, and as time continues to move forward, that shift becomes even more noticeable. Because what's happening now isn't loud anymore. It's not filled with constant arguments, public back and forth, or emotional outbursts. Instead, it's quiet, and that quiet says more than the chaos ever did. Melody's life appears more structured now. She's focused, intentional, and careful about what she shares with the world. Whether it's her career or personal happiness, she moves in a way that feels more protected than before. There's no rush to explain herself, no pressure to prove anything, and no need to revisit the past. That alone shows how much she's changed. For Martell, though, this silence hits differently. In the past, there was always some form of interaction between them, direct or indirect. Even conflict meant there was still a connection. But now, that connection feels weaker, almost distant. And distance can be uncomfortable when you're used to being part of someone's emotional space. People around the situation have noticed that he seems more reflective lately, less focused on the outside noise and more caught up in his own thoughts. It's as if he's slowly realizing that some moments in life don't come back, no matter how much you think about them. Because when someone truly moves on, not in anger, but in peace, it changes everything. There's nothing left to argue with. Nothing left to fix through conversation. No emotional reaction to pull from. Just closure that didn't require permission. And that kind of closure is the hardest to accept. Meanwhile, the public reaction continues, but even that energy has started to fade. People still talk, still speculate, but the intensity is no longer the same. The story has shifted from drama to reflection, from noise to understanding. What's left now is growth on one side and realization on the other. Melody's path seems clearer than ever. She's building something that feels stable and self-defined. Not tied to the past, not influenced by old patterns, and not dependent on validation from anyone else. For Martell, this becomes a different kind of journey. One that doesn't play out in public the same way anymore. It becomes internal, personal. A space where accountability and reflection matter more than explanation. And maybe that's where the real change has to happen. Because at some point, everyone reaches a moment where they can't rewrite what happened. They can only decide what they become after it. And this is that moment. Not a comeback. Not a reaction. But a turning point where both lives move in completely different directions. Melody moves forward with peace as her foundation. Martell is left with reflection as his lesson. And between those two paths, there's no longer confusion about who is healing and who is still learning how. And as that separation becomes more obvious, the contrast between their lives keeps growing in a way people can't ignore. Melody's direction feels steady now. She's not being pulled into old emotions or forced into situations that drain her. Instead, she seems to be building a routine that protects her peace first. Even when her name comes up in conversations or online discussions, she doesn't appear reactive anymore. That change alone shows how much she's stepped away from the emotional weight she once carried. She's in a phase where silence is power. Not silence out of fear or avoidance, but silence because there's nothing left to prove. For Martell, that same silence feels different. It's not peaceful for him, it's uncertain. Because when someone who once reacted to everything about you stops reacting completely, it creates a kind of emptiness that's hard to explain. It forces you to sit with your own thoughts without distraction. And that's exactly where reflection becomes unavoidable. People watching from the outside have started noticing a shift in energy overall. The constant back and forth that once defined their story has slowed down. Even the public discussions have changed tone. It's no longer about who said what or who responded first. Now it's more about what each person has become after everything they went through. Melody is being seen as someone who rebuilt herself step by step. Not overnight, not dramatically, but quietly and consistently. That kind of growth doesn't always get attention in the moment, but over time, it becomes very clear. Martell's situation, on the other hand, feels more internal now. Less about public image, more about personal accountability. When you remove all the outside noise, you're left with the reality of choices made and the impact they had. And that's not something that can be ignored forever. There are moments in life where no one is arguing with you anymore, no one is chasing you, and no one is reacting to you, and that can feel heavier than conflict itself. Because it means the chapter is no longer active. It's finished, even if you're still thinking about it. And that's the space he seems to be in now. Not publicly breaking down, not creating new chaos, but dealing with the quieter part of consequences, the part that doesn't have an audience. Meanwhile, Melody continues forward without looking back. Her focus stays on her life as it is now, not as it used to be. And in many ways, that is the clearest sign that the emotional chapter between them has fully closed on her side. At this point, the story is no longer about a relationship trying to survive or reconnect. It's about two people living with the results of their past decisions in completely different ways. One is building forward momentum. The other is learning how to sit with what's already been written. And as time keeps moving, that difference only becomes more defined. And as that difference becomes clearer, it also becomes harder to ignore the fact that life has essentially separated them in a way that isn't temporary anymore. Melody isn't operating from emotion tied to the past. She's operating from experience. Everything she went through seems to have shaped how she moves now, carefully, calmly, and with a stronger sense of boundaries. She doesn't appear interested in revisiting old cycles, even indirectly. That alone shows a level of emotional distance that doesn't easily reverse. She's building a life that doesn't need constant explanation. And when someone reaches that stage, their decisions become quieter but more intentional. For Martell, that reality continues to settle in differently each day. It's not one single moment that changes everything, it's the buildup of small realizations. Seeing less reaction, hearing less response, feeling less emotional connection where there used to be intensity. That kind of shift forces a person to confront what's actually left. And sometimes, what's left is not what you expected. What makes this situation even more complex is that there's no clear conflict driving it anymore. No direct confrontation. No ongoing public fight between them. Just distance. And distance has a way of speaking louder than arguments ever could. People who have followed their story for years can see the difference in energy. Before, everything felt reactive: statements, interviews, reactions, emotions spilling into public spaces. Now, everything feels contained. Controlled. Almost like both sides are living in completely separate emotional worlds. Melody's world feels forward-facing, focused on what's next, not what was lost. Martell's world feels more reflective, still connected to the past, even when trying to move beyond it. And that difference is what defines this chapter more than anything else. Because healing doesn't always look the same for both people involved in a broken relationship. One person may find peace quickly through distance and rebuilding. The other may take longer to process what that distance actually means. In this case, that imbalance is very visible. What's also important is that the public narrative is no longer controlling their reality the way it once did. Early on, everything they did seemed amplified, analyzed, and debated. Now, even that attention has started to fade into the background. The story isn't evolving through drama anymore, it's evolving through time. And time has a way of softening noise, but sharpening truth. For Melody, the truth seems simple now. Her life is hers to shape, without interference from her past. For Martell, the truth is more complicated, understanding where things went wrong and accepting that not everything can be repaired, no matter how much reflection happens afterward. And that's where the story reaches a deeper layer, not the surface-level drama people first followed, but the human reality underneath it. Two people, once deeply connected, now walking completely different emotional paths. One anchored in peace, the other anchored in reflection. And as both continue forward, the final lesson becomes clear. Sometimes growth doesn't bring people back together, it takes them in opposite directions. And once that realization fully settles in, the way forward stops being about the past at all. For Melody, forward now looks like consistency. The kind that doesn't need public approval or constant validation. Her choices seem rooted in protecting her energy, her children, and the life she has rebuilt. There's a noticeable shift from surviving emotions to simply living beyond them. That's a big change from where she started in this journey. It's not loud progress. It doesn't need to be. It shows up in how she carries herself, how she responds to situations or doesn't respond, and how she no longer appears tied to emotional triggers from her past. For Martell, the forward path is less clear. It's not about visibility anymore. It's about understanding. Understanding decisions